The morning of September 15th began like any other ordinary Tuesday in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Cherry Creek, Denver, Colorado. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the tree-lined streets where families had lived for generations. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and fresh-baked bread from the corner bakery. Maria Santos, a 72-year-old grandmother with silver hair tied in a neat bun, held the small hand of her 3-year-old granddaughter, Emma. They had made this journey countless times before, a simple walk to the neighborhood store just 2 blocks away to pick up fresh milk and cookies, a ritual that had become their special bonding time together. Emma was an exceptionally bright child for her age, with curious brown eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. She wore her favorite pink sundress with white Mary Jane shoes, and her dark curly hair bounced with each small step she took. Her grandmother had dressed her carefully that morning, knowing how much Emma loved looking pretty when they went out together. They moved slowly down Maple Street, stopping occasionally for Emma to point out interesting things: a butterfly fluttering near the mailbox, a bird singing in the oak tree, a neighbor's cat sleeping peacefully on a porch. Maria smiled at her granddaughter's wonder, grateful for these moments of innocence and joy. The corner store, Morty's Market, was a family-owned business that had operated on the same spot for 37 years. Old Mr. Morty knew Maria by name and always saved the best cookies for Emma. The walk took them past several residential homes, a small park with a playground, and a community garden where neighbors grew vegetables together. It was the kind of neighborhood where people knew each other, where children played safely outside, and where life moved at a gentle, predictable pace. Maria had chosen to move here specifically for this reason. She wanted to raise her granddaughter in a place where the world felt safe and manageable. As they approached the intersection of Maple and Fifth Avenue, Emma was chattering excitedly about the cookies she wanted to buy. "Grandma, can I get the chocolate chip ones? The really big ones?" She tugged gently on her grandmother's sleeve, her voice filled with childish enthusiasm. Maria laughed warmly, her weathered face crinkling with affection. "Of course, me Ammer. We'll get the biggest ones they have." They waited at the corner, preparing to cross the street. The traffic light was in their favor, and Maria checked both directions carefully before stepping into the crosswalk, as she had been taught to do her entire life. What neither of them saw coming was the silver Honda Accord traveling at 55 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. The driver was a man named Daniel Kirkwood, 34 years old, financially desperate and completely absorbed in his phone. He had been texting his girlfriend, assuring her that he would pay back the money he owed her, money he had borrowed for gambling debts. His eyes never left the screen as his car approached the intersection. He didn't notice the traffic light had turned red. He didn't see the grandmother and granddaughter stepping into the crosswalk. He didn't hear his car's warning system trying to alert him to the pedestrians ahead. Maria heard the engines roar first, a terrifying sound that made her freeze instinctively. She looked up just in time to see the silver car barreling toward them, its driver completely oblivious. In that split second, her entire body moved on pure maternal instinct. She shoved Emma backward with all her strength, pushing the small girl back onto the sidewalk and away from danger. It was the last conscious action she took before the car hit her with devastating force. Emma fell hard on the concrete sidewalk, scraping her small knees and palms, tears immediately springing to her eyes from pain and shock. But she wasn't hit by the car. She had been saved by her grandmother's desperate, selfless act. She watched in absolute horror as the silver vehicle struck Maria, sending the older woman flying through the air. Maria's body crashed onto the hood of the car, then tumbled off to the side, landing with a sickening thud on the pavement. The impact happened so quickly that Emma's mind couldn't fully process what she was seeing. But that wasn't the end of the nightmare. The driver, still distracted and now panicked, didn't stop. Instead of braking, Daniel Kirkwood hit the accelerator. His tires screeched as the car swerved away from the scene, heading down Fifth Avenue at high speed. Through the rear window of the fleeing vehicle, Emma caught a glimpse of something, A dog. A golden retriever with a beautiful coat, its tongue hanging out, seemingly oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded. Emma's screams pierced the morning air, raw and primal, the sound of a child witnessing something no child should ever see. Neighbors came running from their homes, having heard the terrible sound of impact. Someone called 911 immediately. Within minutes, sirens wailed through the peaceful neighborhood, transforming the quiet street into a scene of chaos and emergency. Maria was rushed to Denver Medical Center with severe injuries, a fractured pelvis, internal bleeding, multiple broken ribs, and a traumatic head injury. For 3 days she remained unconscious, hooked to machines that beeped and hummed continuously. The doctors weren't sure she would survive. Emma was taken to the police station with a victim advocate, her small body shaking with trauma, her words coming in fragmented, confused sentences. She kept mentioning the dog, but the officers weren't sure what she meant or if it was even relevant. As news of the hit-and-run spread through the community, anger and fear gripped the neighborhood. A grandmother had been nearly killed, a child traumatized, and the driver had simply disappeared. The police launched an investigation, but with no clear description of the vehicle or driver, and no witnesses who had seen the car's license plate. The case seemed like it might become just another unsolved crime file gathering dust in a precinct office. But Emma would not forget what she had seen. Deep in her young mind, beyond the trauma and the fear, a memory was forming. A memory of a face, a memory of a car, and a memory of a dog that would, in ways no one could have predicted, help bring justice to the scene of tragedy on Maple Street. Officer Marcus Rodriguez had been with the Denver Police Department for 12 years, and in that time he had learned that some cases demanded more than standard investigative procedures. When the call came in about the hit-and-run on Maple Street, Marcus was sitting at his desk reviewing cold case files, his German Shepherd partner Duke resting peacefully on a mat beneath the desk. Duke was a magnificent animal, sleek, muscular, with a dark coat that gleamed under the fluorescent office lights. His amber eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, a product of years of specialized training and an inherent gift for tracking that few dogs possessed. Marcus and Duke had been partners for 5 years, ever since Duke graduated from the elite K-9 training academy in Fort Collins. In that time, they had solved 43 cases together, recovering 17 missing persons, apprehending 31 suspects, and earning numerous commendations. Their success rate stood at an impressive 98%, a statistic that made them one of the most respected handler and dog teams in the entire Rocky Mountain region. Other officers joked that Marcus didn't need a detective's badge. He had Duke, who was worth 10 detectives combined. When Captain James Wellington burst into the bullpen with urgent news about the hit-and-run, Marcus was already standing, instinctively reaching down to grab Duke's leash. "We've got a serious vehicular assault on Maple and 5th, the captain announced, his voice sharp with authority. "Victim is critical condition at Denver Medical. No clear description of the vehicle or driver. We need Duke on this immediately." Marcus nodded without hesitation. He'd learned long ago that when the captain called, time was of the essence. Every minute that passed gave the suspect more distance, more opportunity to hide evidence, more time to construct a story. Marcus and Duke moved with practiced efficiency, heading to the evidence locker where a cloth from the accident scene was being held. The cloth had been collected by the first responders and carefully preserved in a sterile container, maintaining the scent particles that had adhered to the fabric. As a detective, Marcus understood the science behind Duke's abilities. Scent particles, microscopic and invisible to humans, told an entire story to a dog's sensitive nose. Duke possessed approximately 300 million olfactory receptors, compared to humans' measly 6 million. He could detect odors at concentrations nearly 100 million times lower than humans could perceive. In other words, if humans could smell a drop of liquid in a swimming pool, Duke could smell a drop in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The drive to the scene took 7 minutes. As Marcus navigated through Denver's morning traffic, He could feel Duke's anticipation. The dog's ears perked up, and he shifted his weight constantly, somehow sensing that this particular call was important. Marcus had learned to trust these instincts. Duke had an almost supernatural ability to sense when a case was serious, when someone's life depended on finding the truth. When they arrived at Maple and Fifth, the scene was still chaotic. Police officers were cordoning off the area with yellow crime scene tape, photographing tire marks and blood patterns on the pavement. A crowd of concerned neighbors had gathered despite efforts to keep them back. One woman was crying, her hand over her mouth. An elderly man stood shaking his head in disbelief. Children stared wide-eyed at the police vehicles and their flashing lights. This was real trauma, real tragedy, not something that happened to other people in other neighborhoods. Marcus parked the patrol car and immediately opened the rear door, allowing Duke to exit. The dog's body language transformed instantly. He was no longer a family pet or a relaxed office companion. He was a professional, completely focused, every muscle tense with purpose. Marcus held out the cloth from the accident scene, and Duke's nostrils flared immediately. The dog's head moved slightly as he processed the scent information. The human scent, the sweat, the fear, the adrenaline of the driver who had fled the scene. "Find them, boy," Marcus commanded, his voice firm but encouraging. "Let's find who did this." Duke's response was instantaneous. The dog lunged forward with such power that Marcus had to brace himself, planting his feet firmly on the ground. The leash went taut as Duke pulled forward, his nose to the ground, following an invisible trail that only he could perceive. The dog wasn't moving randomly or hopping. He was following a specific scent with absolute certainty. Years of training had taught Marcus to trust completely in these moments. When Duke was locked onto a scent trail, the dog's accuracy was virtually flawless. They moved down Maple Street at a steady pace, Duke occasionally pausing to confirm the scent before continuing. Marcus's training told him what was happening. The scent particles had been blown by the wind, had clung to vegetation, had adhered to the street's surface. Duke was reading this olfactory landscape like Marcus might read a map, understanding not just where the scent was, but in which direction it was strongest, which way the suspect had traveled. As they progressed, Marcus radioed dispatch to alert other units to their location and direction of travel. Other officers began positioning themselves ahead of Marcus and Duke's trajectory, anticipating where the trail might lead. The pursuit continued for nearly 3 miles through Denver's winding streets, past residential neighborhoods where people came out of their homes to watch the unusual sight of a police officer, and a German shepherd moving with such singular purpose. They passed through Cheeseman Park, where Duke pulled harder, the scent becoming stronger. They navigated through the Baker neighborhood, past boutique shops and cafes that were just opening for the day. The trail twisted and turned, sometimes going straight, sometimes doubling back, revealing the desperate, panicked movements of someone trying to evade capture. Marcus could read the scent trail through Duke's behavior, the uncertainty, the fear, the desperation of the driver. Finally, after nearly 4 hours of tracking, Duke came to an abrupt halt outside an abandoned warehouse in Denver's industrial district near I-25. The warehouse had been closed for years, its windows broken, its brick facade crumbling. Duke barked once, sharply, indicating he had reached the end of the scent trail. Backup units arrived within minutes, and Marcus and his team carefully approached the building. But as they searched the warehouse from top to bottom, they found nothing. No driver, no vehicle, no evidence. The trail had gone cold. The suspect had somehow managed to transfer to another vehicle, to break the scent connection that Duke had been following with such precision. Marcus felt frustration rising in his chest. They had gotten so close, but not close enough. The case would require a different approach now, a new angle, new information from witnesses. As Marcus led Duke back to the patrol car, he had no way of knowing that the breakthrough they needed was about to come from the most unexpected source. A traumatized 3-year-old girl named Emma. The abandoned warehouse stood like a skeletal monument to Denver's industrial past, its brick walls weathered by decades of neglect and harsh Colorado winters. As Marcus Rodriguez and his team methodically searched the vast empty structure, their footsteps echoed through the cavernous spaces, creating an eerie symphony of disappointment. Duke moved alongside Marcus, his earlier excitement and focus gradually diminishing as the scent trail simply ended at this location. The dog's body language shifted from the intense alertness of active pursuit to the confused uncertainty of a hunter who had lost the scent of its prey. Marcus ran his hand along Duke's head, feeling the soft fur and understanding the dog's frustration as deeply as his own. "It's okay, boy," he said softly, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "We did good. We did everything right." But they both knew that doing everything right hadn't been enough. Somewhere between the accident scene on Maple Street and this abandoned warehouse, the suspect had made a critical move, likely transferring to a different vehicle, something that would break the scent connection that Duke had been following with such precision and determination. Detective Sarah Martinez, the lead investigator on the case, arrived at the warehouse just as Marcus was conducting the final sweep of the building's interior. Sarah was a 15-year veteran of the Denver Police Department, sharp-minded and intuitive, with an impressive track record of solving difficult cases. She had worked with Marcus and Duke on numerous occasions and had learned to respect their abilities while also understanding their limitations. As she observed Marcus emerging from the warehouse with Duke, she could read the disappointment etched into both their faces. "Nothing?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from their body language. "Nothing," Marcus confirmed, his voice tight with frustration. "The scent trail ends here completely. Our guy transferred vehicles, probably had an accomplice waiting. We lost him." Sarah nodded slowly, her mind already shifting to alternative investigative strategies. The case had just become exponentially more difficult. Without a clear vehicle description or license plate number, without a coherent witness statement, and with Duke's trail going cold, they were facing the possibility of this becoming one of those frustrating cases that consumed resources for weeks with minimal progress. The victim, Maria Santos, was still unconscious in the hospital. Her granddaughter, Emma, was traumatized and scattered in her account. And somewhere out there, a hit-and-run driver was potentially getting away with a serious crime. "We need to go back to basics," Sarah said, her detective's mind already organizing the available information. "Canvass the neighborhood again, pull traffic camera footage from the intersection, check if anyone noticed a second vehicle in the area, and we need to follow up with the witnesses, especially the little girl. Sometimes children remember things that don't make sense at first." Over the next several days, the investigation proceeded along traditional lines. Officers knocked on doors throughout the Cherry Creek neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen anything unusual that morning. Traffic cameras were reviewed frame by frame, showing the silver Honda Accord approaching the intersection at excessive speed, confirming it had run a red light. The vehicle's path was tracked through multiple cameras as it fled the scene, but the license plate was obscured in every shot, frustratingly out of view or too blurred to read. The victim's condition remained critical. Maria Santos lay in the intensive care unit at Denver Medical Center, her body wrapped in bandages and connected to an array of medical equipment. Her daughter, Lisa, kept vigil beside her mother's bed, praying for consciousness, for recovery, for any indication that her mother would survive this ordeal. The emotional toll on the family was immense, and the lack of progress in the investigation only deepened their anxiety and despair. Emma, the 3-year-old witness, was being cared for by her mother at their home. Child psychologist Dr. Rebecca Chen had been assigned to work with Emma, helping the traumatized girl process what she had witnessed. The initial interviews had been chaotic and fragmented, Emma's account jumping from topic to topic, her memory seemingly unreliable due to shock and trauma. Police officers had attempted to get more detailed information, but questioning a 3-year-old about a traumatic event proved to be an exercise in frustration. 1 week passed without significant breakthroughs. Then 2 weeks. The case that had initially dominated local news coverage began to fade from headlines as other stories claimed public attention. The investigation remained active, but the sense of urgency that had characterized the first days began to dissipate. Marcus and Duke returned to their regular patrol duties, though Marcus found his mind frequently drifting back to that abandoned warehouse, wondering what detail they might have missed, what crucial element had slipped through their fingers. Captain Wellington called Marcus into his office on the 15th day of the investigation, his expression grim. "We're not giving up," the captain said firmly, "but we need to shift our approach. Without a clear vehicle description, without a license plate, we're running out of obvious leads. The department's resources are being stretched thin." Marcus understood what the captain wasn't quite saying. The case was becoming a low priority, resources would be reallocated, and without new information, this might become just another unsolved hit and run. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the child psychologist working with Emma, called the police station with urgent news. She had been conducting art therapy sessions with Emma, allowing the traumatized girl to express her feelings through drawing rather than words. During one session, Emma had created a series of drawings that were far more detailed than anything she had verbalized during police interviews. One drawing in particular caught Dr. Chen's attention, a crude but unmistakable sketch of a car, and in the rear window, a dog. A golden retriever, rendered with surprising detail for a 3-year-old's artistic abilities. Dr. Chen had gently questioned Emma about the drawing, and the girl had become animated, pointing excitedly at the dog in her artwork. "That dog," Emma had said with unusual clarity. "The bad man had the dog was in the car." Dr. Chen had pursued this line of questioning carefully, and Emma had provided additional details she hadn't mentioned before: the dog's color, its size, the way it looked out the window. It was a golden retriever, Emma was certain. A big, pretty dog with a golden coat. Sarah Martinez received the call from Dr. Chen while sitting at her desk, surrounded by case files and coffee cups. As she listened to the information about the dog, an idea began forming in her mind. A stolen dog, a vehicle fleeing a hit and run, a connection between two crimes that might be the breakthrough they desperately needed. She immediately began pulling up reports of stolen dogs reported in Denver over the past month. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, her heart rate accelerating as possibilities began to materialize. Within hours, Sarah had narrowed down the list to 3 golden retrievers stolen from Denver residences in the weeks prior to the accident. One name jumped out immediately: Buddy, belonging to a wealthy businessman named Thomas Kirkwood, stolen just 2 weeks before the hit-and-run incident. Sarah's detective instincts screamed that this was it. This was the connection that would unravel the entire case. As she reached for her phone to contact Thomas Kirkwood, Sarah glanced at a photograph of Duke that Marcus kept on his desk, a gift from the K-9 unit. The dog had helped them get close to the truth, but it was an innocent child's memory and an innocent dog that would ultimately point them toward justice. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would lead them directly to the suspect they had been seeking all along. Detective Sarah Martinez sat at her desk with 3 file folders spread out before her, each containing photographs and detailed information about golden retrievers stolen from Denver residences in the weeks preceding the hit-and-run incident. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow across her workspace, illuminating the intensity etched into her features as she meticulously reviewed each case. Her coffee had grown cold in its ceramic mug hours ago, forgotten as her mind laser-focused on the connections forming between these seemingly separate crimes. The first stolen dog, a golden retriever named Max, had belonged to an elderly woman named Dorothy Williams who lived in the Washington Park neighborhood. The dog had been taken from her backyard on August 28th, 3 weeks before the accident. The second, a retriever named Sunny, had been stolen from a family living in the Capitol Hill area on September 2nd, just 13 days before the hit and run. The third dog, Buddy, had vanished from Thomas Kirkwood's property in Cherry Creek on September 1st, 23 days before Maria Santos had been struck by the silver Honda Accord. Sarah's eyes kept returning to Buddy's file. Thomas Kirkwood was a successful real estate developer, worth millions, with an impressive home in one of Denver's most exclusive neighborhoods. The dog had been stolen from his backyard in broad daylight, captured on security footage but with the perpetrator's face obscured by the angle of the camera. What caught Sarah's attention most prominently, however, was Kirkwood's statement to the police officer who had filed the initial theft report. He had mentioned that his nephew, Daniel Kirkwood, had been staying with him at the time of the theft, and that Daniel had been acting unusually stressed and aggressive. Sarah pulled up her computer database and began searching for Daniel Kirkwood. What she found made her pulse accelerate. Daniel Kirkwood, age 34, had an arrest record that included 2 prior incidents of reckless driving, 1 conviction for driving under the influence, and multiple citations for traffic violations. More significantly, Daniel had a documented pattern of financial instability, gambling debts, failed business ventures, and a history of borrowing money from family members who had grown increasingly reluctant to help him. The timeline suddenly began to crystallize in Sarah's mind with startling clarity. Daniel Kirkwood had been staying with his wealthy Uncle Thomas at the time Buddy was stolen. Daniel had a history of reckless driving and financial desperation. The stolen dog had ended up in a vehicle fleeing a hit-and-run scene, a vehicle driven by someone who was clearly panicked and desperate. The pieces weren't just connecting, they were forming a coherent picture of a crime and a perpetrator. Sarah immediately picked up her telephone and dialed Thomas Kirkwood's number. His secretary informed her that Mr. Kirkwood was in a meeting, but when Sarah identified herself as a detective investigating a serious hit-and-run incident potentially connected to his stolen dog, the secretary transferred her immediately. Thomas Kirkwood's voice was initially confused, but rapidly became alarmed as Sarah explained the situation. "Your dog, Buddy, may be connected to a serious crime," Sarah said carefully, choosing her words with precision. "We have reason to believe that Buddy was in a vehicle involved in a hit-and-run incident that occurred on September 15th. A woman is currently in critical condition at Denver Medical Center as a result of this incident. I need to ask you some important questions about your nephew, Daniel Kirkwood. When was he staying with you? Has he been in contact with you since Buddy was stolen?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Thomas Kirkwood finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of shock and dawning realization. "Daniel was here from August 30th through September 12th, he said slowly. "He was in financial trouble again, asked if he could stay with me while he got back on his feet. I agreed, though I was reluctant. When Buddy disappeared, I suspected Daniel might have had something to do with it, but I had no proof. After Daniel left, he called me once, asking if I had gotten Buddy back. I told him no. He seemed anxious about it, kept asking if I had reported it to the police. That's when I became more convinced he was involved." Sarah's mind was racing now, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with increasing speed. "Mr. Kirkwood, this is very important. Has Daniel been in contact with you since September 15th? Do you know where he is currently located?" "No," Thomas said, his voice tense. "I haven't heard from him. After I discovered my dog was missing, I essentially cut off contact with him. I was angry, disappointed. He's family, but I couldn't condone stealing from me. Why? What do you think Daniel did?" Sarah took a deep breath before responding. "We believe Daniel may have been driving the vehicle that struck a pedestrian on September 15th. A 3-year-old child witnessed the accident and provided details about a golden retriever in the car matching Buddy's description. We need to find Daniel Kirkwood immediately, and we need to locate that vehicle." Within 30 minutes, Sarah had obtained a warrant to search Thomas Kirkwood's property for any evidence related to Daniel or the stolen dog. She had also initiated a statewide alert for Daniel Kirkwood's arrest. As she coordinated with other officers and detectives, the scope of the investigation suddenly expanded dramatically. What had appeared to be a simple hit-and-run case was now revealing itself as a more complex web of crimes: vehicle theft, dog theft, and vehicular assault, all potentially connected to a single individual. Sarah called Marcus Rodriguez to brief him on the developments. "We have a suspect," she told him, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and urgency. "Daniel Kirkwood, 34 years old, currently wanted for questioning in connection with the hit-and-run. He was staying with his Uncle Thomas when the stolen dog Buddy disappeared. The dog was seen in the vehicle that hit Maria Santos. Marcus, I think we finally have what we need." Marcus felt Duke shift beside him, as if the dog somehow sensed the shift in energy through the telephone line. "Where is he now?" Marcus asked. "That's what we're trying to figure out," Sarah replied. "His uncle hasn't heard from him since mid-September. We're checking with friends, family members, known associates. We're also tracking his cell phone records and credit card usage. Someone will have information. We just need to apply enough pressure in the right places." The investigation had transformed overnight from a frustrating dead end into a dynamic, multi-pronged effort to locate and apprehend a specific suspect. Police departments across Colorado and neighboring states were alerted. Daniel Kirkwood's photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies. His vehicle description, a silver Honda Accord, was now the focus of intensified traffic enforcement efforts. What Sarah didn't yet know was that Daniel Kirkwood had been growing increasingly paranoid and desperate over the past 2 weeks. He had been moving constantly, staying with different friends, paying cash for everything, keeping Buddy with him at all times because the dog was his insurance policy, his connection to his uncle's wealth and resources. The walls were closing in on him, and he had no idea that a traumatized 3-year-old girl's drawing and her innocent recollection of a golden retriever had set in motion the events that would ultimately lead to his capture. The critical detail that Sarah had uncovered, the connection between the stolen dog and the fleeing vehicle, had provided the breakthrough that Duke's tracking abilities could not. Sometimes solving crime required both the extraordinary abilities of trained police dogs and the ordinary observations of innocent witnesses, particularly when those witnesses happened to be very young and possessed memories unclouded by the rational skepticism of adults. Detective Sarah Martinez's fingers flew across her keyboard with practiced precision as she navigated through the Denver Police Department's extensive database system. The fluorescent lights of the bullpen hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the workspace as officers moved about their various assignments. Sarah had pulled up Daniel Kirkwood's complete file, and now she was cross-referencing it with other active investigations, traffic violations, and financial records that might provide clues to his current whereabouts. The computer screen glowed with information: arrest records, mugshots, addresses of known associates, and financial transactions dating back several years. What emerged from this digital investigation was a portrait of a man in free fall, someone whose life had spiraled progressively downward over the past several years. Daniel Kirkwood had once been moderately successful. He had owned a small construction company and maintained a decent apartment in Denver's Loudoun district. But poor business decisions, compounded by an apparent gambling addiction, had systematically dismantled his life. Court records showed he had declared bankruptcy 3 years ago. Credit card statements revealed escalating debt, and multiple police reports indicated he had borrowed money from his Uncle Thomas on at least 4 separate occasions, with each loan becoming progressively larger and with increasingly tense repayment negotiations. Sarah pulled up the traffic camera footage from the morning of September 15th once again, watching the silver Honda Accord streak through the red light at the intersection of Maple and 5th Avenue. She had reviewed this footage dozens of times, but now she was looking at it with new understanding. The driver's hands gripped the steering wheel with visible tension. His head jerked slightly, as if he had just realized the traffic light was red. The panic in his movements was evident even through the grainy camera feed. And most tellingly, in the rear window of the vehicle, visible for just a fraction of a second, was the unmistakable silhouette of a dog. Sarah's colleague, Detective James Chen, approached her desk with 2 steaming cups of coffee. James had been working the case alongside Sarah and had just returned from the hospital where he had been interviewing Maria Santos during one of her brief moments of consciousness. Maria's condition is improving slightly, James reported, setting 1 cup in front of Sarah. The doctors think she'll make a full recovery, barring any complications. She's still confused about the accident, but she's getting stronger each day. Sarah nodded gratefully, both for the coffee and the update. The news about Maria's improving condition bolstered her resolve. This wasn't just an abstract case anymore. It was about a real person, a real grandmother who had sacrificed herself to protect her granddaughter. The case had become personal in the way that cases sometimes do, when the investigator realizes that their work could mean the difference between justice and injustice, between closure and endless torment for a victim's family. "I think I've found something significant," Sarah said, turning her computer screen so James could see the information she had compiled. Daniel Kirkwood borrowed $5,000 from his Uncle Thomas 3 months ago. He promised to pay it back within 60 days. The deadline passed without payment. According to Thomas's statement, Daniel claimed he was about to come into money, that a business deal was about to finalize. But that deal apparently fell through, and Daniel became increasingly desperate, increasingly aggressive. James leaned closer, studying the financial records. So he steals the dog to use as leverage, to try to force his uncle to forgive the debt or provide more money. "Possibly," Sarah said, nodding slowly. "Or maybe he stole the dog to sell it. Purebred golden retrievers can fetch several $1,000s from the right buyers. Either way, Daniel needed money desperately, and he was willing to commit crimes to get it. The hit and run could have been the result of panic. Maybe he was fleeing from a location where he was trying to sell the dog, or it could have been completely unrelated, just terrible timing, and a moment of reckless driving that resulted in tragedy." Sarah pulled up another file, Daniel Kirkwood's known associates. The list included 3 ex-girlfriends, 4 friends from college, and various business contacts from his construction company days. She began systematically contacting these individuals, armed with Daniel's photograph and a detailed description of him. The conversations were brief and to the point. "Have you had any contact with Daniel Kirkwood in the past week? Do you know where he might be staying?" The 4th person on the list was a woman named Rebecca Torres, identified as Daniel's ex-girlfriend. When Sarah reached Rebecca at her workplace, an accountant's office in downtown Denver, the woman's voice immediately became tense and guarded. "I haven't seen Daniel in months," Rebecca said carefully. "And I don't want to see him. He wasn't a good person. We broke up because he was becoming violent, controlling. He owed me money that I never got back." But then Rebecca added something that made Sarah's pulse accelerate. "Wait, actually, I did see him. About 3 weeks ago, I ran into him at a shopping center in Aurora. He was with some guy I didn't recognize and they were arguing about money. Daniel looked terrible, disheveled, paranoid, like he hadn't slept in days. The other man was angry, saying something about Daniel owing him for something. I tried to avoid them, but Daniel saw me and called out. He wanted to borrow money from me. I said no and walked away. I haven't seen him since, but I got the sense he was in serious trouble." Sarah's mind raced with the implications of this information. Daniel hadn't just stolen his uncle's dog. He appeared to be entangled with other criminals, people who were making demands on him, people he owed money to. The web of desperation was becoming increasingly complex, revealing a man caught in a web of his own making, with few options and mounting pressure from multiple directions. "Do you remember the name of the man Daniel was with?" Sarah asked urgently. "No, I didn't catch it," Rebecca said. "But he was bigger than Daniel, maybe in his 40s, with tattoos on his arms. He looked dangerous, like someone you wouldn't want to cross. I'm glad I don't know more about him. I just want Daniel out of my life." Sarah thanked Rebecca and ended the call, immediately beginning a new line of investigation. Daniel wasn't just a desperate individual. He was someone caught in a criminal underworld, someone who owed money to dangerous people. This changed the profile of the case significantly. Daniel Kirkwood might be running not just from law enforcement, but from the very people he owed money to. Within the hour, Sarah had obtained Daniel's cell phone records from the service provider. The records showed a pattern of movement across Colorado and into Wyoming. The last confirmed signal from Daniel's phone had pinged off a cell tower near Laramie, Wyoming, approximately 40 miles from the Colorado border. He had been moving eastward, away from Denver, away from his uncle's wealth, and possibly away from the dangerous individuals he owed money to. Sarah immediately coordinated with the Wyoming State Police, providing them with Daniel's photograph and vehicle description. She also contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation's field office in Denver, briefing them on the interstate nature of the case and the potential involvement of organized criminal elements. The case that had begun as a simple hit-and-run was revealing itself to be something far more complicated, a story of desperation, criminal debt, and a man making increasingly terrible choices that had ultimately resulted in serious violence. The breakthrough came that evening when a Wyoming Highway Patrol officer radioed in a match. A silver Honda Accord matching the description had been spotted at a motel in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The vehicle's license plates had been changed, but the vehicle identification number matched Thomas Kirkwood's stolen car. Officers were being positioned around the motel, and a warrant was being prepared for Daniel Kirkwood's arrest. Within 6 hours, Daniel Kirkwood was in custody, and when police officers opened the trunk of the silver Honda Accord, they discovered something that would prove crucial to the prosecution of the case: a golden retriever, frightened and malnourished but alive. Buddy, the stolen dog, would become a critical piece of evidence, his presence in the vehicle placing Daniel Kirkwood definitively at the scene of the hit-and-run that had nearly claimed Maria Santos's life. The Cheyenne Police Department's interrogation room was sparse and deliberately uninviting. A small rectangular space with cinder block walls painted an institutional beige, a metal table bolted to the floor, and 2 uncomfortable chairs that had been designed with maximum functionality and minimum comfort in mind. A single fluorescent light fixture hummed overhead, casting an unforgiving glow across the space. Daniel Kirkwood sat in one of those chairs, his wrists secured with metal handcuffs attached to a chain that connected to a ring bolted into the table. His appearance was dramatically different from his photograph on file. He looked gaunt and hollow, his eyes sunken, his hair matted and unkempt, his clothing soiled and wrinkled. 2 days of evading capture had aged him considerably, the stress and fear visibly etched into every line of his face. Detective Sarah Martinez sat across from him, with Detective James Chen standing against the wall to her left. They had driven through the night from Denver to Cheyenne, eager to personally conduct the interrogation of the man they believed had struck Maria Santos. Sarah had her file folder open before her, photographs and documents meticulously organized, each piece of evidence a hammer blow against Daniel's denials and evasions. "You were identified at your uncle's house on August 30th, Sarah began, her voice calm and methodical. "You stayed there for 12 days. During that time, your uncle's golden retriever, Buddy, was stolen from the backyard. On September 1st. 2 weeks later, on September 15th, a silver Honda Accord registered to your uncle, a vehicle you had access to, struck a pedestrian at the intersection of Maple and 5th Avenue in Denver. The victim is currently in Denver Medical Center recovering from serious injuries. And when we recovered the vehicle in Cheyenne, we found Buddy in the trunk." Daniel's face went pale. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, his jaw working silently. Sarah could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was processing the weight of the evidence arrayed against him, understanding that denial was becoming increasingly futile. "I want a lawyer," Daniel said hoarsely, his voice barely above a whisper. "You'll get your lawyer," Sarah replied, her tone remaining professional and even. "But before that happens, I want you to understand what you're facing. Vehicular assault causing serious bodily injury, hit and run, animal theft, operating a stolen vehicle. Your uncle is prepared to press charges on all counts. You're looking at significant prison time, Daniel, years. But here's what I need you to understand. The victim in this case is a 68-year-old woman named Maria Santos. She has a granddaughter, a 3-year-old girl named Emma, who witnessed everything. Maria threw herself in front of that car to save her granddaughter's life. She nearly died doing it, and that little girl has been traumatized by what she saw." Daniel's hands trembled visibly. A sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. Sarah continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Emma saw your face, Daniel. She saw Buddy in your car. A 3-year-old girl's memory put you in that vehicle at that intersection at that exact moment. And now we have Buddy as physical evidence. We have traffic camera footage. We have your cell phone records showing your location. You can cooperate with us. You can tell us what happened, or you can keep playing games and watch the prosecutor bury you." Over the next several hours, under the watchful eye of a court-appointed attorney who had advised minimal cooperation, Daniel gradually began to talk. His story was one of desperation and poor judgment, of a man drowning in debt and making increasingly terrible decisions in an attempt to stay afloat. He had indeed stolen Buddy, planning to sell the dog to a criminal associate who trafficked in stolen animals. He had been driving toward a meeting with this associate on the morning of September 15th when the accident occurred. He had been distracted, reaching for his phone, and hadn't seen the grandmother and granddaughter in the crosswalk. The impact had been immediate and devastating. Panic had seized him, and his first instinct had been to flee. "I didn't know what to do," Daniel said, his voice breaking with something that might have been genuine remorse or might have been calculated performance. "I panicked. I just drove. I didn't mean to hit anyone. It was an accident, a terrible accident." "Fleeing the scene is not an accident," Sarah said coldly. "You had multiple opportunities to stop and render aid. Instead, you drove away. You endangered more lives on the road in your panic. You victimized a family, and you put that dog through hell." When the interrogation concluded, Sarah and James had obtained enough of a confession to significantly strengthen the prosecution's case. Daniel Kirkwood was formally arrested and charged with vehicular assault, hit and run, animal theft, and operating a stolen vehicle. He was extradited back to Colorado to face charges in Denver's court system. Meanwhile, at the Denver Police Department, Officer Marcus Rodriguez received news that Daniel Kirkwood had been apprehended. He was sitting at his desk reviewing case files when Captain Wellington approached with the update. Marcus immediately stood, his hand moving to stroke Duke's head. The dog had been resting beneath the desk, but perked up at the captain's approach, as if sensing significant news. "We got him," the captain said simply. "Daniel Kirkwood in custody in Cheyenne. He's confessed to the hit and run. He stole his uncle's dog to sell it. Everything connects: the vehicle, the stolen animal, the timeline. Good work, Marcus. Duke did his part." Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction at the resolution, frustration that the case had required more than Duke's extraordinary tracking abilities, and vindication that their initial pursuit, though seemingly unsuccessful, had pointed them in the right direction. Duke had gotten them to the warehouse, and from there, the investigation had progressed through old-fashioned detective work and the unexpected eyewitness account of a traumatized 3-year-old. A week later, Officer Marcus Rodriguez and Duke were summoned to the courthouse in downtown Denver. The prosecution wanted Duke's presence during Daniel Kirkwood's initial appearance before the judge. It was an unusual request, but Sarah Martinez had specifically asked for it, believing that Duke's presence would provide a powerful symbolic reminder to the jury pool that justice involved multiple elements: human investigation, canine capability, and innocent eyewitness testimony. As Marcus and Duke entered the courtroom, Daniel Kirkwood was led in wearing an orange jail uniform, his hands shackled in front of him. When Daniel's eyes fell on Duke, something profound seemed to happen. The dog, responding to his training and Marcus's gentle guidance, didn't react aggressively or threateningly. Instead, Duke simply sat calmly beside Marcus, his bearing regal and composed. But as Daniel's eyes lingered on the German shepherd, the man's entire body seemed to compress inward. His shoulders hunched, his face went ashen, and his leg began shaking visibly. Duke had never met Daniel Kirkwood before. The dog had only followed a scent trail that had led to an abandoned warehouse. But in that moment, as Duke's amber eyes seemed to pierce directly into Daniel's soul, it was as if the man saw judgment incarnate. The dog represented the law, the consequences, the inevitable reckoning that had finally caught up with him. More significantly, for Daniel, Duke represented something else, the reminder that he had been caught because of something as innocent and as incorruptible as a dog's sense of smell and a small child's honest memory. The judge took her seat, and the proceedings began. Daniel Kirkwood's public defender entered a not guilty plea, despite Daniel's earlier confession, maintaining that the case should proceed to trial. But the presence of Duke in the courtroom, combined with the evidence the prosecution outlined, sent a clear message. This was a case that would be difficult to defend, a case where truth and justice were on a collision course with guilt and evasion. As the hearing concluded, and Daniel was led back out of the courtroom in shackles, his eyes never left Duke. The dog had become far more than just a police animal. He had become the symbol of the investigation that had ultimately unraveled Daniel Kirkwood's carefully constructed lies and evasions. And in the eyes of everyone present, it was clear that Duke had played a crucial role not in capturing the suspect, but in serving as the embodiment of justice itself. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the morning of October 28th, nearly 6 weeks after the hit-and-run incident that had set everything in motion. Spectators filled every available seat, with additional observers standing along the back wall and in the gallery overflow section. Local news reporters occupied the front rows, their cameras and recording devices positioned to capture every moment of what was shaping up to be one of Denver's most unusual criminal trials. The case had captured public imagination, not just because of the serious nature of the charges against Daniel Kirkwood, but because of the extraordinary way in which evidence had been uncovered and the remarkable role that a traumatized 3-year-old girl would play in testifying for the prosecution. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over the courtroom with quiet authority. She was a 48-year-old jurist with a reputation for fairness and intelligence, someone who understood the complexities of the legal system and who possessed a genuine compassion for victims while maintaining strict adherence to the rules of evidence and procedure. Judge Morrison had already ruled on several pretrial motions, including a heated debate about the admissibility of Emma's testimony. The defense had argued vigorously that a 3-year-old's memory was inherently unreliable, that she was susceptible to suggestion and coaching, that her testimony would be more prejudicial than probative. But Judge Morrison had reviewed the extensive documentation provided by Dr. Rebecca Chen, the child psychologist, which detailed Emma's consistent and detailed recall across multiple interviews and therapy sessions. The prosecution's case had been presented over 3 days. Traffic camera footage showed the silver Honda Accord running the red light. Forensic evidence demonstrated that the vehicle's bumper contained traces of Maria Santos's blood. Cell phone records placed Daniel Kirkwood's phone at the location at the time of the incident, and the testimony of Thomas Kirkwood had established Daniel's access to the vehicle and his financial desperation. But the prosecution knew that the most powerful testimony would come from Emma herself, the innocent witness whose memory had set the entire investigation on its current trajectory. On the morning of Emma's testimony, there was a palpable tension in the courtroom. The judge had issued strict orders about courtroom decorum. No audible reactions, no talking, no disruptions. Emma's needs would be the priority, and the court would accommodate the special requirements of a very young witness. A cushion had been placed in the witness box to elevate Emma so she could be seen by the jury. A child psychologist would be permitted to sit nearby, though not within Emma's line of sight to the defendant. Water and tissues had been placed within easy reach. Emma entered the courtroom holding the hand of her mother, Lisa Santos, Maria's daughter. The little girl wore a white dress with yellow flowers, her dark curly hair adorned with a matching yellow ribbon. She looked impossibly small against the vast architecture of the courtroom, dwarfed by the judge's bench and the towering walls. The jury members, 12 men and women who had been carefully selected through a rigorous vetting process, watched her with expressions of sympathy and concern. The bailiff administered the oath in a modified version appropriate for a young child. "Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Emma nodded solemnly, her small hand placed on a children's Bible with illustrations of friendly animals and bright colors. Prosecutor Michael Harrison stood and approached Emma with practiced gentleness. He had worked extensively with Dr. Chen to prepare for this testimony, learning how to frame questions in ways a 3-year-old could understand and answer. "Emma," he began softly, "can you tell us what happened on the morning that your grandmother got hurt?" Emma's lower lip trembled slightly. Her eyes, wide and dark, seemed to take in the entire courtroom with a mixture of confusion and careful attention. When she spoke, her voice was small but surprisingly clear. "We were going to get cookies," she said, "me and Grandma, and then the car came really fast, really fast, and it was loud." "What happened next?" Michael asked gently. "Grandma pushed me," Emma continued, her words coming faster now as the memory seemed to crystallize in her mind. "She pushed me back and then the car hit her, and she fell down, and the car went away really fast." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the court reporters seemed to pause, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The testimony of a child describing the moment her grandmother had nearly died protecting her. Several jury members had tears in their eyes. "Emma, when the car went away, did you see anything inside it?" Michael asked, guiding her toward the crucial detail. Emma's face brightened slightly, as if she had been waiting to share this particular detail. She pointed directly toward the defendant's table, where Daniel Kirkwood sat in his orange jail uniform. "There was a dog," she exclaimed, her voice becoming animated. "A big, pretty dog with golden fur. It was looking out the window, that dog." "Do you remember what kind of dog it was?" Michael asked. "It was like the dogs in the park," Emma said thoughtfully. "Golden and big and pretty. It looked sad. The car was going really fast and the dog was in there." The defense attorney, a woman named Catherine Blackwell, stood for cross-examination. She approached Emma with what she clearly intended to be a friendly demeanor, but her questions carried an edge of challenge. "Emma, isn't it possible that you're remembering things that people told you happened? That maybe you heard adults talking about a dog and now you think you saw it?" "No," Emma said firmly, shaking her head with the absolute certainty of a young child. "I saw the dog. It was golden, like the dogs at the park, and it looked sad." "But Emma, you were very scared that day, weren't you? When you're scared, sometimes it's hard to remember things correctly." Emma considered this seriously, her small brow furrowing in concentration. "I was scared," she acknowledged. "But I remember the dog. The dog was in the car, I remember." Blackwell tried several different angles, attempting to suggest alternative explanations for Emma's memory, proposing that she might have confused details or been influenced by adults. But Emma remained consistent, her account unwavering. She remembered the fast car. She remembered her grandmother pushing her. She remembered the golden dog in the back window. And she remembered the man's face. Though when asked to identify him, she simply pointed at Daniel Kirkwood and said, "That's the bad man. The one who had the dog." When Emma's testimony concluded, her mother was permitted to lead her out of the courtroom. As they passed by the defendant's table, Emma glanced toward Daniel Kirkwood. The man could not meet her eyes. Instead, He stared down at his hands, his entire body seeming to shrink inward. For a moment, the powerful machinery of the legal system seemed to pivot around the simple, honest testimony of a 3-year-old child who had witnessed a terrible crime and had the courage to speak about it in front of strangers and cameras, and a man who had hurt someone she loved. After Emma left the courtroom, the prosecution called Dr. Rebecca Chen to testify about the psychological principles governing child memory and trauma. Dr. Chen explained how traumatic events can sometimes create surprisingly accurate memories in young children, how Emma's accounts had remained consistent across multiple interviews and therapy sessions, and how the specific details Emma had provided, including details about Buddy that she could not have obtained from conversations with adults, demonstrated the reliability of her recollection. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with their verdict, the foreperson stood and read the findings. Guilty on all counts. Vehicular assault causing serious bodily injury, hit and run, animal theft, operating a stolen vehicle. The verdict was unanimous and decisive. As Daniel Kirkwood was led away, his face gray and his movements mechanical, Judge Morrison turned toward where Emma's mother was sitting in the gallery. The judge inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect for the child who had found the courage to testify against the man who had hurt her grandmother. In that moment, it became clear that sometimes justice doesn't require sophisticated forensic analysis or expert testimony alone. Sometimes, justice requires the simple, honest testimony of an innocent child, whose memory proves more reliable than any adult's recollection could be. The sentencing hearing took place on November 15th, exactly 2 months after the hit-and-run incident that had shattered the lives of everyone involved. Judge Patricia Morrison sat elevated on her bench, her black robe seeming to amplify her authority and gravitas. The courtroom was once again filled to capacity, though the atmosphere had shifted from the tension of trial to the somber finality of judgment. Daniel Kirkwood stood before the judge, flanked by his public defender, waiting to hear the sentence that would determine the trajectory of the remainder of his life. The prosecution presented victim impact statements. Maria Santos appeared in person, still moving with some stiffness from her injuries but standing with undeniable dignity. She spoke about the pain of recovery, the months of physical therapy ahead of her, the emotional trauma of nearly losing her life. But more significantly, she spoke about Emma, about the fear she saw in her granddaughter's eyes every time they approached an intersection, about the nightmares that still woke the child screaming, about the innocence that had been stolen from a 3-year-old who had witnessed something no child should ever see. Lisa, Emma's mother, also provided a statement. She described the therapeutic interventions Emma was undergoing, the slow process of helping her daughter overcome trauma, the way her daughter now hesitated before crossing streets, constantly looking both ways with an anxiety that seemed far too advanced for her age. Lisa's voice broke several times as she described the psychological burden her daughter was carrying as a result of Daniel Kirkwood's reckless actions. Thomas Kirkwood stood next. His statement was brief but carried immense emotional weight. He had lost a nephew, in a sense, lost him to his own poor choices and criminal actions. But more significantly, Thomas had become acutely aware of how his stolen dog had played a role in the chain of events that had led to tragedy. He had donated Buddy to a canine therapy organization, recognizing that the dog had inadvertently become part of both crime and justice. "I failed to recognize the signs," Thomas said quietly. "I should have done more to help Daniel when he was struggling, and I'm grateful that no one else was seriously injured, but I cannot forgive what he did to that child and to Maria." Daniel Kirkwood was given the opportunity to address the court. His statement was halting and inarticulate, filled with expressions of remorse that rang hollow against the weight of evidence and testimony. He spoke about his financial struggles, his gambling addiction, his poor judgment. He asked for mercy, for understanding. But his words fell on ears that had heard victim impact statements, that had seen a 3-year-old child point an accusing finger at him from the witness stand, that had witnessed the courage of a grandmother still recovering from life-threatening injuries. Judge Morrison delivered her sentence with careful precision. Daniel Kirkwood was sentenced to 7 years in prison for vehicular assault causing serious bodily injury, 3 years consecutive for hit and run, and 2 years for animal theft and operating a stolen vehicle. The sentences were to be served consecutively, meaning Daniel Kirkwood would spend a minimum of 12 years incarcerated. Additionally, he was ordered to pay restitution to Maria Santos for her medical expenses and ongoing care, restitution to Thomas Kirkwood for the vehicle and the emotional distress caused, and a substantial fine that would be donated to victim advocacy organizations. As Daniel was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, he cast one final glance back toward the gallery where Emma sat on her mother's lap. The 3-year-old girl met his gaze without fear, without hatred, but with the simple certainty of someone who had told the truth and been believed. That moment, the meeting of eyes between perpetrator and innocent witness, seemed to encapsulate the entire case. A child's memory had brought justice. A child's testimony had convicted a criminal. And a child's courage had transformed a tragedy into something approaching closure. In the weeks following the sentencing, the case began to transcend its immediate circumstances and take on larger significance. Legal scholars and child psychologists began studying the trial record, using Emma's testimony as a landmark case in discussions about child witness reliability. Several law schools incorporated the case into their curricula, using it as an example of how trauma can actually enhance memory for specific details, particularly in young children experiencing significant emotional events. Officer Marcus Rodriguez and Duke were formally recognized by the Denver Police Department at a public ceremony. The captain presented them with the Medal of Valor, a commendation typically reserved for officers involved in dangerous confrontations or heroic rescues. But the captain's speech acknowledged that Duke's tracking abilities, though ultimately not leading directly to the suspect, had initiated the investigative process that eventually led to Daniel Kirkwood's apprehension. More significantly, Duke had become a symbol of the department's commitment to justice and the protection of vulnerable citizens. The most unexpected development came from an animal rescue organization called Hope for Paws. The organization had learned about Buddy's role in the investigation and about how the golden retriever had been used as a tool in Daniel Kirkwood's criminal enterprise. Hope for Paws launched a fundraising campaign to establish a canine therapy program specifically designed to help children who had experienced trauma witness to violent crimes. The program was named Buddy's Justice Initiative, and its purpose was to provide therapeutic dogs to child witnesses in criminal cases, animals that could provide emotional support during the traumatic process of testimony and trial. Emma became an unexpected ambassador for the program. Though her mother initially had reservations about exposing her daughter to further public attention, Emma expressed a surprising interest in working with therapy dogs. A gentle golden retriever named Sunshine was assigned to her, and the bond that formed between the small girl and the larger dog was remarkable to witness. Sunshine accompanied Emma to her ongoing therapy sessions, providing a non-judgmental presence that seemed to help Emma process her trauma and fear. Maria Santos made a full recovery. She returned to her work as a school librarian and resumed her daily walks with Emma, though now with increased caution and awareness. But the experience had transformed her in unexpected ways. She began volunteering as a speaker at community events, talking about victim advocacy and the importance of supporting traumatized witnesses. She established a scholarship fund in Emma's name, designated for child psychology students and researchers studying trauma in young children. Thomas Kirkwood, Emma's uncle, became an unexpected philanthropist. Moved by the role his stolen dog had played in solving a serious crime, He made substantial donations to the Buddy's Justice Initiative and to victim advocacy organizations throughout Colorado. He also established a fund specifically designed to help people struggling with gambling addiction, recognizing that his nephew's addiction had been the catalyst for the entire chain of tragic events. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Major networks produced documentaries about the case, focusing on the extraordinary testimony of a 3-year-old girl and the ways in which different elements of the justice system, canine tracking, forensic evidence, detective work, and innocent eyewitness testimony, had combined to achieve justice. Emma was invited to speak at child advocacy conferences, though always with her mother present and with careful attention to her emotional well-being. She became, in a sense, the face of child witness advocacy, the reminder that children's voices matter and that their memories, even when traumatized, can provide crucial testimony. By the 1-year anniversary of the incident, the impact had rippled far beyond the initial crime scene on Maple Street. Duke had become a celebrity in Denver, often recognized during patrols and applauded by community members who understood his role in initiating the investigation. Emma, now 4 years old, had become an advocate for trauma survivors, her small voice carrying weight and credibility that adults often lack. Maria Santos had fully recovered and had returned to her normal life, though forever changed by her experience. And Daniel Kirkwood, incarcerated in a Colorado state prison, had become a cautionary tale about the consequences of crime and the power of justice. The case had demonstrated that sometimes justice emerges from the most unexpected sources: a 3-year-old girl's memory, a German shepherd's sense of smell, a stolen golden retriever, a grandmother's selfless act of protection, and a legal system willing to listen to an innocent child's testimony and to believe her words. Together, these elements had combined to create a narrative of justice that would resonate across the country, reminding everyone that truth, once spoken, possesses a power that no perpetrator can ultimately escape. Emma's voice, small as it was, had proven to be louder and more consequential than Daniel Kirkwood's attempts at evasion and denial. And in that triumph of truth over falsehood, of innocence over guilt, the entire community found hope.